Welcome to the EndurHunt podcast. Join me as I share my experiences as an emergent hunter, offer advice on how to overcome challenges, and pursue your passion for hunting. I am your host, Andrew the Kosovic. I started hunting in 2018. I went on my first hunt in Montana on a non-resident mule deer elk combination tag. Came from New Jersey all the way over to Montana at 26 years old with my best friend Peter. And although we didn't get anything on that very first hunt, I knew that hunting had to be a part of my life forever. There was no way that I was not going to have hunting be a part of my life, and I have made sure to go hunting every single season that I can since. In the 5 years that I've been hunting, I have been in Montana, Utah twice, Arizona, Wyoming, New Jersey, and Texas. And I'm planning on adding more states to that list eventually. I created this podcast so that I could share my own journey and hopefully be a resource for others who did not necessarily come into hunting through the traditional way. Someone who's coming from a path similar to myself, who's learning it on their own, who didn't have any real mentors or someone that they could lean on and have direct infield experience from. If you want to hear more about my specific story, I'm going to encourage you to go to episode 1 of the podcast. I go over my background, how I got started, and everything on that front. That's not the subject of today's discussion. This is episode 5 of the EndurHunt podcast, and we are going over emergent hunter, adult-onset hunter, talking about the two terms and what they mean for the future of hunting. You know, for pretty much most of the time that I was hunting, I had considered myself an adult-onset hunter. Admittedly, I was never a fan of this term. Coming from the military, the specific field I was in, you're taught from the beginning that words mean things. And so the way we speak, the language that we choose to use, those specific words have a meaning. And the reason they have a meaning is because of the way that people perceive them, right? You could mean the nicest thing in the world, but perception is reality. And so when I look at a term like adult onset hunter, if you break it down, and we're just going to break it down into 2 segments, adult onset and hunter. We're going to keep the hunter part by itself. Think about everything that you're familiar with that starts with adult onset. The first thing that comes to mind for me is dementia. And every other instance, every other time that adult onset is the prefix for anything, it's always something negative. And I always kind of felt this, but it was actualized in me when I heard Ben O'Brien from the Woodside podcast use the term emergent hunter. I heard this term on his podcast last year. I think it was going to or coming back from my Arizona elk hunt, but it may have been Utah. I don't really remember. It doesn't matter that much. To be honest, we're splitting hairs here. But I loved that term because emergent is new. It's something that is more positive, and it puts a more positive spin on that word. And I think that in the hunting community, there can be somewhat of a negative connotation towards emergent hunters or adult onset hunters, whatever term you choose to describe people like myself. I'm not going to spend this entire podcast talking about vocabulary. I do want to talk about what emergent hunters are, what some of the challenges we face are, the things that we care about, and how it's the future of hunting, in my opinion. I think the future is going to have a significant amount of emergent hunters. So, with that being said, I hope that you're willing to stick along for the rest of the podcast, and I'm always curious to hear people's thoughts. So if you're listening to this on any platform, whether you're doing the audio version, video on Spotify or YouTube, I'm very curious how you got started in hunting. Are you an emergent hunter? Are you a traditional hunter? What was your first hunt, if you remember it? I'm very curious. So either go on Instagram, I'm at EndurHunt, and leave a comment on my most recent post, or shoot me a DM, or head over to YouTube if you're not already watching this on YouTube and drop a comment on this podcast episode. I'd love to see how many people who are listening to this either are emergent hunters like myself, grew up hunting, or are not hunters at all. Chances are, if you're listening to this right as it comes out, you're one of my friends and family or the few followers that I have that are listening to the podcast. And for those of you, I thank you very much. I appreciate the support. But let's get right into this subject. Emergent hunters did not grow up hunting. That doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't come from a hunting family. I think it's more common today to have people who grew up in a hunting family, didn't really do it when they were in their youth, focused on school, went to college somewhere that they don't live, and focused on their education and career, trying to build a future for themselves. And then they come back to hunting later in life, or they discover it for the first time later in life. So emergent hunters are people who did not start hunting when they were young, children, teenagers. They start hunting in their 20s, 30s, or even older. So why is this happening? The hunting population in America has always been relatively small, but the number has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller over time. I know it doesn't feel that way when you're hunting out in the woods and there's a bunch of people anywhere. If you've ever done an over-the-counter elk hunt in Utah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I haven't done Colorado yet, but I've heard the same thing. There's people everywhere. And so you might think, there's hunters everywhere. We have too many hunters. There's too many hunters in the woods. Statistically, that's just not true. Yes, there's been an increase in Western hunting, but there's hunting opportunities galore everywhere. But when you look at the societal trend, we are getting pushed further and further away from hunting. We are getting pushed further and further away from hunting because we are also just being separated from the food chain entirely. When you look at the trend in technology, and we can just focus on technology here for a moment, you have vegetable-based meat that's replicating burgers filled with all sorts of chemicals. Lab-grown meat is starting to gain traction. People are continuing to research this and trying to make it a reality. And if you just look at how technology has affected how we eat and acquire food today, you don't have to leave your house if you don't want to. You could get all of your food, depending on where you live. If you're in certain rural areas, of course, that's not possible. But the people who are listening to this podcast, most of you probably live in suburban areas where DoorDash, Uber Eats are readily available. You have Instacart or other services that can actually deliver groceries and supplies to your door. You don't have to leave your house at all if you don't want to. Technology has allowed us to become so comfortable that you could be as lazy as you want. The human brain likes to take the path of least resistance. And so it is natural that we have been moving further and further down this separation. But if you also look at the trends, we're seeing increases in depression, increases in anxiety, all sorts of things that I personally think, I am not a scientist, I personally think are because we are being separated from those primal instincts that we have done for tens of thousands of years, if not millions of years. We have this divide. Technology continues to push society into advancement. Technology continues to push the envelope on efficiency and effectiveness, and there are so many benefits to that. All of the things that technology has done for us to increase work-life balance, make us safer, these are all great benefits that have came out of technology. But that doesn't mean that everything that technology does is a benefit. And I don't think anyone intended that we would become further and further separated from the food chain. I think it is a secondary or a tertiary effect that has just arisen from the situation that we're in. As a human species, we continuously push the envelope. We're always trying to innovate. And so it's kind of natural for this to happen. And I think that it is this exact relationship we have with technology, the dichotomy between technology and nature, that is drawing more people like myself to actively seek out primitive means of living life. I know there's something primal in all of us. When you kill your first animal and you are able to put your hands on it, it's a cathartic experience unlike anything else. Then you go butchering that animal, you take it home, you cook it, you are able to serve it to friends and family and tell the story of how you acquired it, what the animal was doing. You remember every little detail of that hunt. It unlocks something. And once you catch that bug, I don't think you want to give it up, ever. I know I don't. I'm pretty sure all of you listening to this probably feel that way too. So that is why I think there is a rise in emergent hunters. One thing that I should have probably mentioned earlier is that some of the ways that I'm going to describe emergent hunters are not exclusive to emergent hunters. I acknowledge the fact that there is no black and white in anything in life. There is nuance and a gray, and hunting is absolutely a gray area for everything. Now, you might be asking yourself, what do emergent hunters mean for hunting? It's a complicated question because the nature of being an emergent hunter, we all come from diverse backgrounds. My day job is in IT. I work in technology, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who gets into hunting that's an emergent hunter is going to come from the same background as me. Emergent hunters can come from any industry, any walk of life. They can have their own set of political beliefs. That being said, I think that the overall impact on hunting is going to be positive. If we look back at technology for a second, think about preserving and protecting our ability to hunt. Anti-hunting groups leverage technology in ways that has made them significantly effective. If you can go back to and remember a few years ago when anti-hunting groups out of California were calling the Washington State's Department of Fish and Wildlife to oppose the spring bear hunt. Zoom calls that were not a thing in the past allow these anti-hunting groups to have their voices heard. They are very organized and use technology in a way that we hadn't seen in the past. Unfortunately, the traditional hunting background is not usually very tech savvy. And I don't mean that to offend anyone. I'm just saying what I have observed from my own personal experiences now having interacted with traditional hunters for a long time. Even people my own age that aren't hunters that I've met from different backgrounds are, well, let's be honest, technologically illiterate. So the reason I'm saying this is emergent hunters are more likely to come from a technology background like myself. And yes, I'm biased because I come from the IT background. But emergent hunters have a different mindset. They're going into it brand new with a fresh set of eyes, and they're going to want to use technology to their advantage. Not only is that going to help them with hunting efficiency and effectiveness, but it is going to be useful in the battle for maintaining and preserving our right to hunt, trap, and fish. Advocacy alone, we can focus on some other benefits that I think emergent hunters are going to have. Statistically, looking at the age of hunters across the spectrum, you have a big bubble at the end of the spectrum. The older class of hunters make up the majority of hunters. And then you're starting to see a small bubble where there's an increase of those in the last few years that are in their 20s and 30s who are doing it for the first time. This influx of new hunters is something that is going to be significant for conservation. When you look at Pittman Robertson, Dingle Johnson, you need people buying into the system. And emergent hunters are going to do that. Without new waves of hunters coming in, we are not going to have dollars from tags. We are not going to have dollars from ammunition, rifles, bows, all the other equipment that is covered underneath the umbrellas of Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson. If we don't have people contributing, then that money that goes towards habitat conservation, that goes towards wildlife research, is going to wash up. And then we will start seeing significant negative impacts on wildlife. We're going to lose habitat. We won't be able to maintain existing habitat. And unfortunately, we would eventually see animals probably enter their way onto the endangered species list and maybe even extinction. I know that that might be a little alarmist, but the hunting population is aging up, and eventually we're going to see those members drop off. And without someone to pick up the burden of buying into the system, that money goes away. And then we're not going to be able to fund the amazing wild places and wild things that we want to chase. Although this may mean that you'll see more hunters in your normal hunting spot, it doesn't mean that there's a lack of opportunity. It is up to the states to manage their hunts and their wildlife populations. And residents and non-residents alike have the ability to make their voices be heard. tags should be allocated in a way that is sustainable for wildlife. So we've talked about some of the potential impacts that emergent hunters are going to have on hunting in the future. I think that overall it's going to be positive. I know that this means that chances are, especially with the surge in interest in Western hunting, that your spot may get blown up and it may be harder for you to get away from hunters. But I think the overall benefit is worth the problems. Again, I'm biased. I'm an emergent hunter. I've only been doing this since 2018. So I am that guy that's going into your spot. And I can promise you that I'm one of them because I love Western hunting. I go on a Western trip at least once a year since I started hunting. I have not missed a year since Montana, and I don't intend on missing one. For me, it's one of those things that I love doing every year. So going out west is a really great opportunity for me. And I know that that's somewhat hypocritical because I am pseudo complaining about the same thing that I'm telling people not to complain about. The difference is, I think, that I know that there are people in my spot here in Texas, but it hasn't stopped me. I'm just trying to get more creative, finding new ways of getting in and getting away from the people or using the people to my advantage. With the right mindset, you can make an obstacle an opportunity. And that creativity, the willingness to innovate and try and find a new way to do it is, I think, something that we're all going to have to do as hunters regardless. Technology isn't going away. The interest in hunting, I don't think, is going away. And I hope that through podcasts like this and other media that we'll be able to continue to encourage people to get into this activity that I know I am extremely passionate about, and I expect that you are too. The next thing that I'd like to talk about are some of the things that emergent hunters care about. I'm going to caveat this the same way I did earlier. This is not exclusive to emergent hunters. I think that a lot of traditional hunters feel the exact same way as emergent hunters do on these things. But I know that they are especially true for emergent hunters. I know this from firsthand experience and talking to friends that I have gotten into hunting and other people that I've met online that have gotten into hunting at an older age. I think one of the most common things that emergent hunters care about is connecting with nature. As I mentioned in the beginning, I think the reason why we have this surge in emergent hunters is because technology is pushing us further and further and further away from nature. We are not separated from nature. I know that at times it can feel like when we're in our cozy houses with our temperature controlled and climate controlled rooms that we're not really in nature, but we are. We are part of the animal kingdom, and our brains are genetically wired for that. Having that connection with nature is vital for so many aspects of life. I mean, the physical benefits and the mental benefits draw a lot of people in. I don't know that anyone actually makes the choice to start hunting because they want to reap physical benefits, like going to the gym would per se. But there are immense physical benefits from it. Even if you are a tree stand hunter, you drive to the trailhead, you park your truck, you walk a quarter of a mile to your tree stand, hop in the tree stand and sit on your ass for the next few hours. That is still time that you got out of the house. You walked a quarter of a mile that maybe you didn't walk, probably with some gear on your back. You climbed up into a tree, climbed back down, and then walked back to your truck. It's more exercise than you would have done otherwise. And if you do it multiple times throughout the season, that adds up over time. Plus, just being outside, away from screens, listening to the sounds and taking in the sights of nature is incredibly calming, peaceful, and I'm sure that there is some form of physical benefit that comes from just being outside. And that's not even accounting for the mental health benefits. I don't know about any of you, but that week that I get to separate from my phone and from all technology is amazing. Again, I work in an IT job, so I'm sitting behind a computer almost all day. I have a work phone. I sometimes get phone calls and text messages for things related to work when I'm not working. And that is the job that I chose. I have no regrets about that. But that week that I get to disconnect and truly just focus on being in the moment, on task with hunting, connecting with nature, and trying to pursue my quarry, I don't know. There's nothing quite like it. I feel refreshed in a way that nothing has ever made me feel like before. And it's more than just camping, because camping is nice too. But when you go out and hunting, that primal instinct, that disconnect that you get in connection with nature, it triggers some happy chemicals in my brain. I don't know. And I know that other people feel the exact same way. So you've got the physical benefits of actually being outside, the mental health benefits also of being outside and connecting with your primal self. And then the last benefit that I think is also pretty critical for people coming in on the health side of things is the purity of the meat that you're getting. Not only are you the direct part of the food chain in this case, you know every single step that meat goes through, especially if you butcher it yourself. And not only that, you cannot get more free-range organic meat than meat that you harvested from an animal that you killed with your own hands, essentially. Yes, you're going to use a rifle or a bow, but still, you are the one pressing the trigger or pressing the release, and you are responsible for taking that animal's life. You followed it and watched it fall, ideally. You took its life, and you know the entire life cycle of that meat. Lab-grown meat is not going to be the same as that. No amount of organic or whatever terminology they want to use for the meat in Whole Foods or whatever supermarket you go to, nothing is going to compare to truly wild meat. Nothing's going to compare to it. You cannot get a more protein-dense source than wild game, period. And I know that was a big factor for me. I love the fact that I can go into my freezer right now, pull out meat. I know the story of where that animal came from, how I killed that animal. I processed it myself with my own hands and equipment, and now I'm going to feed it to my family. It doesn't get much better than that. On top of the health benefits, I think something that emergent hunters care significantly for is conservation. Being part of the North American model of conservation is a really precious thing to me. I know that the animals on the landscape today exist because we are part of wildlife management. And I mean management in all aspects of it. Admittedly, I have spent the vast majority of my hunting time in big game, but I have done small game hunting now, and I have unsuccessfully done predator hunting. I'm trying to get better at it, and it's something that I'm focusing on this year. But being part of the entire wildlife management process is, as I learn more, I am even more and more motivated to continue to do it. And I want to get involved in all aspects of it. And I think that other emergent hunters feel the same way as me. Once you realize the benefit that you can have on wildlife populations, looking at it holistically, and I think this is a big differentiator between hunters and animal rights activists, is that they tend to look at an individual, whereas we look at a species. When you look at a species and realize that the population benefits from taking an older age class animal out that is potentially hindering other members from reproducing and growing the population, it's night and day. That's the one thing that is probably black and white about hunting. If you have an aggressive older age class buck and he is fighting off all the young bucks and preventing them from breeding the does, well, you're not going to have as many offspring in the spring. And so by removing that buck from the population, you're actually benefiting wildlife. Now, I'm probably preaching to the choir with this. I'm just trying to explain what some of the things that emergent hunters really care about are. And conservation is a big one, but it's not only the species, right? In order to have the wildlife that we want, you have to preserve the habitat. That means public land and private land. If you look at states like Texas as a great example, almost all of the land is privately held, but we have a huge deer population here in Texas. The state of Texas has to partner with private landowners in order to effectively manage deer populations. And you look at states like Arizona or Montana, who have different breakdowns of private and public, the relationships still need to be there. And emergent hunters want to be a part of that. I know personally, I'm a member of BHA, RMEF, NTRCP. And I think other emergent hunters want to join groups the same way that I do. We want to support organizations that are doing the actual habitat work, because it's one thing to have the land, and then it's another to manage the land. When you look at the upland bird populations, the ground nesting bird populations, both turkeys and grouse are hurting because we don't have the right habitat. And part of that is the encroachment of humans expanding, but it's also we're not managing the land that we have. But we need organizations and individuals that are willing to step up and actually do the work and manage it. That takes dollars and it takes voices. We have to advocate and be an advocate for the resources, both the animals and the land that we want to hunt on. Emergent hunters want to be part of the conservation process. And I think that's because we realize that, at least on the land front, it's a scarce resource. I'm a huge fan of Randy Newberg's abundance mindset, and I think that when it comes to finding and building opportunities, we need to make a bigger pie than focusing on maintaining our piece of the pie. But when it comes to land, there is a finite amount. If you include private and public, we're not getting more land. It's not happening. And so I think people like myself are very passionate about that in particular, because we realize that there are limited opportunities. The human expansion continues to happen, and it's going to whittle away both private and public land hunting opportunities. And that is why it is crucial for us to be vocal, be part of the community, and fighting for our resources. And I think that's why one thing that emergent hunters who are joining later in life, because we don't have the same experiences, it's easy for someone who grew up hunting to sort of take for granted the land access they have. You might know all of the hunting spots because your family has been hunting them for generations, or maybe you have your own farm, lease, or access. People like myself don't have that. We're starting on public land most likely, unless you knew someone or you had access to land. As an emergent hunter, you're starting on public land, and that's the unfortunate reality of it. And so you have to be, going into this, that you have to be an advocate for the resource, because if you're not, it's going to go away. And I want my kids and grandkids who aren't even alive yet to be able to hunt the way that I do. And if I'm not active in this, then it's not going to happen. And that is why I think you see us, and that is why I think emergent hunters are so vocal and care so much about conservation. The next thing I've kind of alluded to that emergent hunters care about is ethics. I think emergent hunters like myself are not fans of the treatment of animals in slaughterhouses generally. The concept of animals spending their entire lives in a cramped cage, getting fed food that is not natural for them to eat so that they have more fat or they grow a certain way, it just doesn't appeal to me. And I think that a lot of people my age getting into hunting the same way as me feel like I want to not be a part of that process. Since I started hunting, it has been my goal to acquire as much of my food through hunting as I can, period. And at this point, it's been pretty easy for me to replace beef. I have not bought beef in 2 years now. I don't intend on doing that. I've got a freezer full of elk meat, and I still have some deer meat from the previous hunting season. So my freezer is looking pretty good right now. I'm not perfect. I still have to buy chicken. I still buy pork. Despite the fact that I live in Texas, I have yet to kill a hog. I've been here for 3 years, and every time I'm supposed to go hog hunting, something happens. I'm about to pay for it at this point. So every time I'm supposed to go hog hunting, something happens, something falls through, and inevitably I'm not able to go. Or the one time I went, nothing showed up. I'm not trying to go down that rant, but after being here for 3 years, I thought I would have killed a pig by now. Moving on. I do my best to procure as much meat as possible through hunting, but there are certain things that's just not going to happen. I mean, I would need to own a lot more land and have a lot of chickens to replace the amount of chicken that I eat. I eat a lot of chicken. It is what it is. I love it. It's delicious and it's lean. But I make a concerted effort to consume as much wild game as possible. And I think that others like myself try to do the same thing. You know, I'm at that point where I want my garden. I have tried and I'm figuring it out. But I'm also interested in learning how to can and preserve food. I think that this is an area of life where once you start going down, especially as an emergent hunter, I think you're more prone to be passionate because it wasn't part of your life. There's a spark that comes in when you discover something as an adult, after you have already set and established yourself, you have these mental models, you have this way that you think your life is supposed to be, these values, and then hunting comes along and it screws everything up in the best way possible. I think that I am more interested in that kind of stuff because I didn't grow up with hunting. When you grow up with anything, or, if you reflect back on your life growing up, there are things that you took for granted for sure. If you reflect back and you look at the experiences that you've had compared to other people that you know, whether you met them through school, work, college, whatever, you had experiences and things that you took advantage of and took for granted that you didn't even know you were taking for granted when you were growing up. And unfortunately, I think that leads to a little bit less passion. And that's not a bad thing, right? Like, we all have differences in things that we care about. It just so happens that I'm extremely passionate about self-sufficiency, procuring my food, not being part of the commercial food industry as much as possible. That's a value for me, and I know plenty of other emergent hunters that feel the same way. But it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong if you are okay with it and you just want to go out hunting once a year, even if you don't get anything, and that's fine. But talking about ethics and things that emergent hunters care about, I think that's really high up on the list. And the other thing, this one is probably a little bit contentious, but hear me out. Because emergent hunters started later in life for the same reasons that I was talking about passion, when it comes to the ethics of conducting the hunt, I think that emergent hunters hold themselves to a high standard. You didn't grow up with role models who have been hunting for 20, 30, 40 years, whatever. And I think that the morals that we have behind taking shots and shot opportunities has gotten progressively stronger on what I would consider the ethical side. I think emergent hunters are less likely to take a pot shot at an animal that they're unrealistically going to get. And that's not to say that all traditional hunters are this way. I think the vast majority of hunters are not interested in taking unethical shots. But I do think that emergent hunters pay more attention to the shots that they take. I know I do. I know I would rather come down from full draw rather than release an arrow on a sketchy shot. I don't care if it's the biggest bull ever, and maybe if I was standing in front of a 400-inch bull and it was the only opportunity I was getting on the last day, maybe I'd be eating my words right now. But I do think that emergent hunters spend more time actively thinking about the ethics of shots and shot placement. And again, I think it's because of one of the reasons that they tend to start hunting is because they want to be a positive part of the food chain. They want the animal to suffer the least that they can. They want it to die quickly so that the meat is untainted and that the animal is able to die as peacefully as possible. Again, that's not exclusive to emergent hunters. I just think that the nature of emergent hunters, how they get into hunting, that it is something that they spend more time thinking about. All right, now for the last thing that I think emergent hunters care especially about: community. At least I know I do. Again, I'm biased. This is my podcast after all, and I'm talking about my own experiences, both from what I've seen online, talking to people in person, and observed myself from my own actions. I think that emergent hunters have a true passion for hunting. They really love the pursuit of wild game. They love the challenge and embrace and welcome the challenge. And they want to share that with other people. They want to be part of a community of people that feel the same way that they do. They also want to be part of the community that is an advocate for what we do. It takes a village is a common saying, but it's the truth. When it comes to hunting, protecting and preserving the activities that we love to do, it takes community. You cannot do it alone. I know that it's not uncommon for people to think of themselves as the lone survivor who can go out into the woods and survive solely with a .22 or a shotgun. And maybe you can, but to do it in today's society, to do it the right way, to take advantage of all of the resources at our disposal and to maintain legal hunting, maintain this wonderful North American model of wildlife conservation that we have, it takes community. And I know that I love being part of the hunting community. I'm in several Facebook groups. I'm on Go Wild. I'm on Instagram. I'm trying to be part of the community, supporting other people, and trying to be a voice for the community. And I think that a lot of other emergent hunters do that too, and they want to. It also helps that we don't have a lot of mentors, and it would be nice to have people to learn from. But we also want to build a community. I mean, hell, that's the reason I started this podcast. I want to help be a resource for other people. I think there's not a lot of hunting media that is focused on emergent hunters specifically. There's great resources out there like Meteor that have all sorts of articles, but there's nothing that's really focused specifically on emergent hunters. And although I'm primarily documenting my own journey, I hope to craft content specifically for people like myself. I want to create a community and create content that I wanted back in 2018 when I was getting started. We all need to come together as a hunting community to support each other. If we want to preserve the future of hunting, we cannot be ousting one another. We can't be creating divisions based on weapon choice or season or species that we want to hunt. Yes, it's fine to heckle each other, and that's all fun and dandy. But at the end of the day, we need to support one another. If nothing else from this podcast, if you are listening to this and you're a traditional hunter, I ask you to try and welcome emergent hunters. Put yourself out there as a resource. Try to support someone in your local community on your state's Facebook hunting group. I'm sure you're on there. And try to embrace them. We need to support each other if we want the future of hunting to exist the way it does today. So as I end this podcast, I want to ask you to reflect on your own hunting journey. Think about how you got started, who supported you along the way, the type of community that you had that you relied on when you were starting. Even if you started when you were 6 years old or 7 years old, you relied on other people to help you in one way or another. And so as you reflect on that, I'll ask you to consider the next time you see a post from a new person on Facebook or a post from someone on Instagram, Go Wild, or your hunting forum of choice, that instead of ridiculing them or scoffing at them because they asked a stupid question, you put yourself out there as a resource, the resource that you wanted when you got started. It benefits all of us if we can focus on being the resource that we needed when we got started. And that is my ask for you. All right, I think that's going to be everything for this episode of the podcast. If you've made it this far and you're still listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on emergent hunters and your own hunting journey. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave a comment down below. What did I miss? What is something that you think I should have discussed as an impact of emergent hunters? Or if you're an emergent hunter, what is something that you think I should have included? Tell me about how you got started in hunting. I'd love to hear from you on Instagram. I'm at EndurHunt, same thing on YouTube. Those are really the only two social medias that I use. But I'd love for you to connect with me there. Tell me what I missed. Tell me what I could have done better. Tell me your story of how you got into hunting. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast and support me in what I'm doing. I truly do thank you. Even if you don't comment on anything, just know that I still appreciate you. Until next time, thank you.